Free will. I highly recommend the section Strong AI and Free Will from the Book of Why. Again, Judea Pearl. Remember, the current limitations of deep learning, AI programs are on rung 1 of the ladder. So they're seeing an association of the ladder of causation. We need to build systems with the capabilities of doing and particularly imagining. We need to build a causal understanding of the world into the machine, which should be possible from recent advances in cause and effect. Earlier, we spoke of the universe being a deterministic process. At least on the macro level, every event occurs from a preceding cause or causes. On the objective level, we don't have any choice. We were always going to choose the path that we've taken and will take. We're only a more complex version of a leaf blowing in the wind. We're just a leaf that is aware it's floating and thinks it can steer. The objective level of description often makes us feel bad. Not having control doesn't feel good. Accepting determinism takes away all control we hope for. When we observe neurons in the brain, there appears to be no more magic than brain chemistry. Neurons fire and never appear to break the natural laws of physics. Every moment of your life determined by mechanistic chemical signaling. At the same time, determinism doesn't feel true. Don't you feel like you make choices? Right now, I can choose to touch my nose or not. How do we join these descriptions of objective and subjective reality? Because objectively, it really seems like determinism is true. We have no choice. But subjectively, I make decisions all the time. Pearl is a compatibilist. He believes that free will and determinism are philosophically coherent, and we can explain both worlds, a determined universe and our inner experience. Free will is actually imagination, the highest rung of the ladder of causation. Choices and options are what-if scenarios. We have causal models of the world which allow us to ask, what if I had changed my mind? What if I had taken a different action which would lead to a better outcome? Quote here, this expression is mathematically the same as the effect of treatment on the treated, mentioned in chapter 8 of his book, and we have lots of results indicating how to estimate it. Given the fitness beats truth theorem, we should consider that free will is an illusion. Remember, senses outside the body need to be more precise. Senses inside the body can be vague enough to satisfy needs. What computational benefit is there to free will? And a quote, I think that understanding the benefits of the illusion of free will is the key to the stubbornly enigmatic problem of reconciling it with determinism. The problem will dissolve before our eyes once we endow a deterministic machine with the same benefits. The benefit of free will. Well, let's look at what neural activations are considered willed or intentional and unintentional. And this is a quote from the Wikipedia page on moral development, because we can also look at how morality develops in human beings over time. 5 components make up people's concept of intentionality. An action is considered intentional if a person has A, a desire for an outcome, B, a belief that the action will lead to the outcome, C, an intention to perform the action, D, skill to perform the action, and E, awareness while performing it. So in this section of the Book of Why, which I'll try to paraphrase, in many cases, voluntary actions are recognized by a trace they leave in short-term memory, with the trace reflecting a purpose or motivation. So Pearl also uses the example of a soccer game. So if you imagine a player at the center of the match, and they have all these intentions, maybe they want to impress people, maybe they just really want to win the game. And at the time, when they make a choice, say they go to score a goal, there's thousands of actions which are competing for their attention, thousands of options that they could take. And at some point, maybe later we can ask why they took a certain action, but we're asking that person, that soccer player, to reflect on their own mind, think about what they had wanted and how they evaluated their actions. Pearl says too, rationalization of actions may be a reconstructive post-action process. In the heat of the game, thousands of things compete for their attention. The crucial decision is which signals to prioritize, and the reasons can hardly be recalled and articulated. So Pearl breaks this down into 2 questions that AI researchers are following, and it's about function versus simulation, with the first driving the second. So function is driving simulation. And once we understand what computational function free will serves, then we can start developing these in software. So this illusion of free will gives us the ability to speak about our intents and to subject them to rational thinking, possibly using counterfactual logic. So imagine that your coach pulls you out of the game afterwards and they saw you made a bad mistake and they're like, you should have passed the ball to Lewis. Well, when they say that in their 8 words, what's going on? It's actually very complex, and there's a lot of meanings embedded in those simple words. So first, if we talk about should have, that's trying to transmit the information very quickly from the coach to the player that in the future, when faced with a similar situation, you should always choose to pass the ball in that case, rather than take the shot yourself. So at that same time, if we think about this from a computational perspective, the similar situations are far too numerous to communicate, and that's when we use the should have. So the coach points to the player's action, which is representative of the player's intent at decision time. And by saying that was a bad move, the coach is asking the player to identify software packages that led to the player's decisions and reset those priorities among the passages to pass the ball. So it's actually really complex what's being communicated, but who would know those software packages to run, to pass, to evaluate? Who would have better access to those software packages, or you could say neuronal pathways, than the player themselves? Like, we can't go inside someone's brain and tweak it around. We have to communicate to them that they need to edit their own mind and change their own evaluation and their own behaviors. They're nameless neural paths that can't be referenced by the coach or any external observer. So it's really about intent-specific analysis. Thinking in terms of intents, therefore, offers us a shorthand to convert complicated causal instructions into simpler ones. So Pearl really thinks that if you had a bunch of robot soccer players on a field, then it would be computationally more efficient for them if they were to think in intent-specific analysis, if they were to think that they had intentions and could communicate as if they had free will, then they would play soccer better and more efficiently. So it's weird, like, if these soccer robot players could act as if and speak as if they had choices, it would be better for them to play. But in order to communicate naturally with humans, strong AIs will certainly need to understand the vocabulary of options and intents. And so they'll need some illusion of free will. They'll need some idea of it. The ability to reason about one's own beliefs, intents, and desires has been a major challenge to AI researchers and defines the notion of agency. Philosophers, though, have studied this as a classical question of consciousness. So what's the difference between a program that we have on our computer and a software agent program? Does a software agent program have agency, and how is it so different? If we can make an algorithm for counterfactuals, it's going to be a major step forward for questions about consciousness and agency. So Pearl says that there would be 3 parts to making a conscious agent program, or an agent program that we could say has agency. And first, it would need a causal model of the world. It would also need a causal model of its own software. So, what makes it tick, how it makes decisions. And it would also need a memory that records how intents in its mind correspond to events in the outside world. So again, it's like, I have to think, what was I thinking at that time and what did I end up choosing? We have to have a memory of that. He also goes on to say that he believes that we will be able to make machines that can distinguish good from evil, at least as reliably as humans. But that first requirement of a moral agent for a moral machine is to be able to reflect on its own actions, which is also counterfactual analysis. And once we can program self-awareness, then he believes that, and I also agree, empathy and fairness would follow, because it's based on the same computational principles. But if it can do it for itself and you're just adding multiple agents into that, it seems like you would be analyzing the other agent's perspective from your own self-perspective. But again, people talk about Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, and it's super interesting, but that's rule-based. And so this is a very different approach to morality than finding these perfect rules. It's really about intents and outcomes here that help to define morality. So he thinks that we should be equipping machines with the same cognitive abilities that we have as humans, which include empathy, long-term prediction, and self-restraint. And then we would allow them to make their own decisions. So basically too, I mean, the more we are able to engineer morality into a machine, then these horrible apocalyptic scenarios where the AIs take over and we're being destroyed, those start to fade away into irrelevance, and the more we can understand this. So moral AI is extremely important, and it seems that we can be capable of doing it. And again, we tend to think, well, what about humans? We're not super rational and we're not super moral as much as we claim to be, and we made all these mistakes. But again, I think with machines, we can start to really analyze it and break it down and update it more objectively than we are able to do with ourselves. And perhaps we could make an extremely rational moral agent. Pearl is saying, just like we assigned AI to play Go and chess, and we created something that went past our creative abilities and we're able to learn from it, maybe we can learn from a moral superintelligence as well. So he says, there's no reason to refrain from building machines that are better able to distinguish good from evil than we are, better able to resist temptation, better able to assign guilt and credit. And yeah, we'll be able to depend on these super moral machines, and we'll be able to learn how our own free will works better and how to manage it. And he says, such a thinking machine would be a wonderful companion for our species and would truly qualify as AI's first and best gift to humanity. So this is a really optimistic way of looking at it. But if we really think about, shouldn't we be engineering, in as clear a way as we can, a moral agent? AI that acts morally but also thinks morally and is able to explain morality. But let's sit and reflect though. This view of morality and agency leads us to conclusions which may be uncomfortable. While we accept all agents we know of live in a causally determined world in which the choices we make were entirely determined by preceding factors, we still have a framework to assign moral praise and blame. Once an agent is able to reflect on its actions and intents, then update its future decisions to change its response, we can treat it as a moral agent. Moral agency is on a continuum according to the abilities of the agent. The better able an agent is at self-reflection and update, the more moral they can act. The less able an agent is to act morally and update, the less they should be morally judged. In a species example, lizards are unable to learn new movement patterns. They don't have the ability in their brains to update. Lizards are not moral agents because they act on pure instinct, how they were self-organized. Homo sapiens learn throughout their lifetime to act morally, reflecting and updating. If a person has poor executive control, meaning they have limited short-term memory and difficulty resisting impulses, they are less accountable for their actions. If a person has an area of the brain that is smaller and weaker than average, it cannot be fair to judge them by a normal standard. Of course, we can say, if we were in their situation, we would have acted differently. What we're saying is, if we were in the same environment, we would react differently. But the judgment is based on an entirely different situation with the person removed. We're judging the intents and control of the agent, which we changed when considering ourselves in their position. If we keep that person in the same situation, we see the agent could never have acted differently. Their neural activation patterns were determined by preceding causes beyond their control. Rather than excusing any action, we see the focus of criminal justice should always be on reform of the perpetrator and reparations to the harm. Punishment has no place in moral systems other than deterrence. When an agent cannot update from punishment, the punishment is worthless and only begets needless suffering. Justice for offenders should be proportional to their moral agency and focused on reforming the offender for future interactions. As a person ages beyond their prime, they have less moral agency. As mental faculties for reflection and control decline, so too does moral ability. So we must develop moral beneficial AI to avoid doomsday scenarios. As a species, we must decide against what some describe as errant technology, not AI, the misaligned programs that try to change us all into paperclips or generally lack empathy. Clearly, we see a divide between moral intelligence and general intelligence, which finds a path to a desired goal state without judging the end goal against any standard. If we aren't careful, AI will be created purely for power and dominance by the government and rogue corporations. Each person is morally responsible for what they choose to support. So I hope you choose to support a moral system and the development of a moral AI to enhance our wellness. Okay, so before I go on with this section, I'm almost done here, so we're almost through. But of course, when I wrote this, I have continued reading other sources, and I always think about this. Free will is really tough. And a book I would recommend, 2 books actually, it's Robert Sapolsky's Determined, which is an excellent work, although somewhat crushing. Now, of course, he doesn't believe in free will of any kind, at all. And another work I would suggest too is Sean Carroll's The Big Picture, where he talks about compatibilism. I will tell you that the majority of philosophers today, at least in a survey from a while ago, are compatibilists about free will. So they do think that you can hold determinism and free will both at the same time. And it's really weird to dig into these conversations. I wouldn't say I was a compatibilist for a long time. When you dig in, it really feels like free will is being redefined. And it is worth, though, really thinking about free will, because when we talk about it, we often say, I made a choice. They made a choice. When you say should, you had all the options, and you should make the choice of this one, etc. So I think this language is not going anywhere. I think we'll always have it. I think there's something to being a limited, finite, subjective creature that makes choices. It's going to feel like free will. So this is complicated, but I would almost say, like in Determined, that I'm like a compatibilist who understands that we have future free will. Basically, when you have an agent like described here that's able to learn new behaviors and update its actions for the future, then you have more of a moral agent, even if that is all determined. Like, again, it's wrong to morally judge a lizard for the most part, but we're different from a lizard in that we can learn new behaviors. And that's inherent to free will. So what about...
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this clip, please consider checking out the full video and the series linked in the description.